Good morning, my lovely people, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Dose. On today's episode, we have a special guest in the studio. Well, he's not really here because, social distancing, but we've got Carvin Goldstone, famous comedian, born and raised in Durban, here to discuss all things COVID-19. He actually is a journalist by profession, and he's been doing quite a bit of research, and I like his opinion. So let's hear what he has to say. Good morning, lovely people, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Dose with me, Dr. Suhail Essa. Today we have a very interesting guest. I have Carvin Goldstone with me in the studio. Well, he's not actually with me, but social distancing. He's in Durban at home with his Christmas decorations, and he's on the podcast today to discuss what we've been discussing over the past few days. I just wanted to get his opinion on what's going on. So let's hear what he has to say. How's it going, Carvin?
I'm good, Stale. And are you working at the moment?
Yeah. I have been working a little bit. Not too much, but...
Are you doing general patients, or are you busy with some COVID-19 cases?
I have seen a few. I have, suspected ones. Thankfully, I've tried to trace the ones that have gone for testing, and thankfully, most that I've traced or been in contact with have tested negative. So that's great. But I mean, you can never be sure. The efficacy of these tests, there's like a 30% false negative.
Why is it so high? Why are there so many false negatives? 30% is quite high, right?
I guess one is because it's a fairly new virus, so the testing is also fairly new. I mean, they're using a pretty similar model to how they test for influenza, H1N1, those types of things.
If you had a 30% model for pregnancy, and you went to get a pregnancy test, and then it came back and said, you might be 30% pregnant. Or not.
There's a 30% chance you may not be pregnant.
Don't tell people yet.
Yeah. Would you take that test? I wouldn't take that test if there was a 30% chance. But it's pretty scary. I'm not gonna lie. A lot of doctors, even family members of mine, have said, like, "Are you really sure you want to go there? Are you really sure?" There's young doctors in the States and in Italy dying, and yeah, so there's a little bit of anxiety in the air. I don't know. I'm feeling a bit confident. So I've been working. And how have you been, Carvin? How's life at home?
Yeah, I've been good. I've been trying to figure out the space. I'm not sure, Sale, for those of you who don't know Sale's a doctor and a comedian. So if the stage never comes back, you'll be okay. But I think
Actually, I wanted to discuss that with you because actually, Carvin, for those of you, for a few of my followers who may not know Carvin, apart from being an award-winning comedian, you also have a background in journalism, right?
Yeah.
So how long did you work as a journalist for?
I was a journalist for 14 years. So.
Okay, and were you like in the field or studio?
Yeah. I've done everything in journalism.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great, man.
I've done TV and print. I've done all the beats. I've done crime. I was a politics reporter for 4 years. I've also won lots of journalism awards. I've got about 4 Journalist of the Year awards.
Oh, really? Wow.
So
Which news agency were you with?
I was with ENCA. I was with independent newspapers.
Okay. Not News 24, huh?
No, not News 24.
Because those people, I feel like they don't fact check anything. They just take, someone tweeted that. All right, must be true. Let's put this out as news.
The problem is with journalism at the moment is that a lot of it's not really very good, and it's not their fault necessarily, or the journalist's fault. I'm an Arsenal fan. I don't know what teams people support here, but we used to watch Arsenal and Theo Walcott who
Mm.
is not a bad player,
Mm.
but when he was on the ball and he missed, myself and Myron Naika, who also worked at ENCA with me, we both scored Arsenal. We used to always say, it's not his fault. He's being asked to do something he can't do. So the fact that he missed that or that he couldn't score there, it's not his fault. That's not his capability. And I think sometimes with journalism it's like that, right? I think a lot of journalists are being dragged, but a lot of them are very young, and the issue at the moment is it requires a bit of experience. Our science reporting in general in South Africa is not great. And all of this is a lot of this is science reporting, right? They're asking everyday journalists who follow crime and court and whatever to now become science journalists, to understand viruses, to understand epidemiology. Yeah. And for a lot of them, it's too far.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long stretch. I mean, this thing takes a long time to study, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
But more so than that, it's also new for us. Like as doctors, we have no idea what's going on as well. We're learning as quickly as we can, but the information we're using, a lot of it, a lot of the information we're using is retrospective. We're just looking at old studies that we did on swine flu and all the rest. So we don't really have much insight into this. So I think it's a new time for all of us. But definitely, I've seen a lot of misinformation from news agencies.
The problem also with the misinformation is that because the information is changing every day, do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? Is it airborne? Is it aerosol? Is it only droplets? This stuff every day, if you log on, the WHO or the CDC or the NICD are saying new things because this new study is being conducted on the first group of people that had the condition. So it keeps changing.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. But well, what I wanted to ask you is we'll discuss this a bit later about whether you think there's going to be an extension of the lockdown and the reasons. But in terms of your old career as a journalist, would you consider going back now with the current lockdown, or maybe just writing or anything like that?
Well, I think the lockdown is going to force. It's so funny. On February 11th, I sent a message. Durban has a comedians group, and in the group, I only wrote one thing the whole year in the group. And in the group, I wrote, 2020 will be the year full-time comedians go back to full-time jobs.
Yes.
But I didn't anticipate this. But as it's unfolding, it's becoming more and more true. And obviously, I wasn't thinking of myself necessarily being one of those people, but very much so. To the point that I have applied for jobs. Because I do have a skill set that...
Yeah, and I think for me, I think I had this conversation with you probably maybe last year about me leaving medicine for a while to pursue stand-up comedy and do like one-man shows and tour and stuff, because I felt that I couldn't do both or give both equal attention. And then when the COVID-19 started becoming a pandemic, that's when I also had to make the decision and go, okay, I'm going to have to go back to work now. And I'm going to have to, because obviously it's almost as if you feel that you owe it as a service to your country. And I think like even with journalism and stuff, there's a reason why it's an essential service as well, because we need to know what's going on. We need to get good people in the front line.
Yeah, and I think in this moment, people are asking me, okay, so a lot of people don't know I was a journalist. People who only know me from comedy have no idea. So obviously, I kind of assessed and I realized the biggest co-starring pandemic in South Africa is fake news. And so after observing it for a bit, I realized, no, I have to start writing stuff. I have to use the skill to help clear up information, which is what I've been doing. So I've been writing a lot of articles, also just to get people. So a lot of the articles are also a little bit provocative, just to make you ask questions. Because I think if people ask questions, they become more aware of information, and
Yeah.
they research as opposed to reading something and then deciding, oh, okay, that was interesting, and moving on. I don't want people to do that. If you read the pieces will always ask questions that will make you sit and look at and think, I wonder if that makes sense or not.
Yeah. I've read a few of your articles, and the thing and the reason why I have you on, because I wanted to get a comedian on, but as I said, the reason why you're perfect to be on a show like this is because I feel like a lot of your opinions are, very heavily fact based. A lot of the stuff that you quote are journals and scientific data, as opposed to just opinion based articles, which, anyone can write them. Everyone, there's a million opinions out there. But to actually have a good informed opinion, I think you need to have like a world view of what's going on and look at it from both sides, which I think I might be a bit, lacking. Like I have a good medical knowledge, so I can understand that. But I think the things that you've been discussing recently is the socioeconomic and political side of this whole pandemic and how it's going to affect us as, our economy and society.
So I think to really like for people to understand what's happening, you have to consider the virus is it's medical, obviously, it's scientific, and then it's political. So the political responses are very important, and to understand why those political responses happen in certain countries and why we respond in this particular way, politically speaking. And then it's definitely social. So for me personally, the best situation is you have scientists in the room, you have social scientists in the room, and then you have economists in the room. And between the three groups, you find a way where you find a path that saves lives but doesn't destroy lives in years to come. And what economists are good at, economists are good at predicting trends and using models to try to decide where or show us where the economy might go, which is going to be important because when we finish with this month, whether we go into another lockdown period or not, what's going to happen is the psychology of what we've been through, the PTSD. We can have a little bit of a trauma.
Yeah.
Eating out, going to events, being in public spaces.
Yeah,
and that trauma.
And that's and that's another reason why when I look at this entire situation, going back to work, whether for me it's an essential service, or you as well, if you go back to journalism, it would be an essential service. But for anyone to go back to their day job, because I feel that the year for live performance will almost be lost. For me, that's my opinion, and maybe you have a different opinion, but in my opinion, I think that even if this lockdown ends in April, and it's obviously never going to be lifted completely. Even if they end the lockdown, it's going to be slowly opening up certain areas, but it's going to be a very long time. I would give maybe 6 months to a year before people feel fully comfortable gathering in a space where it's like a voluntary gathering, where you're paying money to go and watch somebody perform or something like, or going to the movies, things like that. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it'll be in different areas. We'll have our sort of barriers dropped. So, for example, I think people who've got weddings planned are still going to do their weddings after the lockdown. There was a couple, obviously, for trying to do their wedding in the lockdown.
Yeah.
I think you have booked your venue, you've paid your deposit, and I've got a few bookings for weddings that fall outside of the lockdown period. And those are going to happen. Those are definitely going to happen, and I'm going to be there. And I think events that we can't really manipulate too much, we are going to have those interactions. But I think for us, getting to a point where we, in a small room with lots of people, I think that's going to take a lot of reassurance that everything is okay. And I think that's where people who've already been through the coronavirus and hopefully have developed antibodies or should have, in theory, developed antibodies and are now not immune but able to fight it if they ever come in contact with it again. And then the vaccine at the later point, I think that's when we reach a little bit of a normality, is that people feel that they can't catch it from you, which is how we feel at the moment. We're so weird with each other now. I was in the shop the other day and someone sneezed, and everyone kind of just like shunned it.
Everybody just stopped and looked.
Yeah, everyone like they didn't like stop, just like looked away. Like
I've
like
seen
it's
some
so
I have seen some weird stuff, man. I saw someone with a full biking helmet walking in a supermarket.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'm
that's
like,
what they should.
look, I guess that would definitely work. I'm pretty sure that that would work.
That would perfectly work.
That
Yeah,
would it definitely work. It just looked very weird to see somebody, picking up grapes with a bike hat on. Like a big white guy with a big biker jacket and a full bike. It was just a strange thing for me. But I've seen a lot of strange stuff with people with PPE. I've seen people with designer masks, like having a Nike logo, Adidas. I'm sure those things have hit the hood hard. Just branded masks, Supreme over the front.
Nike. I
Yeah,
had a Nike mask.
I've
I made it
seen.
myself.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few of those. So it's been interesting. But one thing that you did mention, with regards to like people coming to shows, right? We can't really blame them, right? We can't really blame people for not wanting to come to a show, and there's a lot of fear and paranoia. But I also do think that certain people in live entertainment are going to suffer, and others actually aren't. I think that a lot of South Africa still believes that once the lockdown is lifted, it's almost as if the virus has disappeared. Uh, I
Yes.
think there's certain, and I guess in a lot more like lower socioeconomic uh, areas, people still have this idea that the lockdown is going to be now, and once the lockdown is over, everything goes back to normal, and we've stopped the curb of the virus, so we're going to go back to regular life. And who cares? We'll go to a concert again. We'll go to a show again. This can't affect us. And I think that's also something that's worrying, or we should be concerned about.
Okay,
And
so
is it
that's gonna
then,
depend.
yeah, and is it then our responsibility to go, actually, I'm not going to put on a show? Like for those who do put on shows where there's, let's say, 1,000 people in a small confined space or whatever, is it then our responsibility to go, it's not a good idea. It's irresponsible for me to put on the show where I know there's a potential people could, get infected here. And I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends how much of an impact the virus makes in our communities. So I think our response to it is going to be proportionate to the impact we felt. The virus has not really impacted your life, aside from not being able to go to work, not being able to meet, aside from
The social
restrictive-
aspect.
Yeah, the restrictive rules and guidelines from the government to protect you from the virus. The actual virus has not maybe come to your family. I mean, we only have 1,600 cases and 12 deaths.
Yeah.
And across a population of 59 million, there's not a lot of people impacted by that small number of deaths and cases. But if that number keeps going up, then people will start to have a personal response to the virus because they've lost someone. They know someone who's very sick. And if we never get to that point, then I think our society will find it easier to go back to normal.
Like if we do genuinely.
Societies where there's been a lot of, like Italy and the US, where there's been a lot of first-hand interaction with the virus, I think those societies are going to have a harder time than societies who flatten the curve early. So people don't realize it, but in some ways, us going into a full lockdown before we had deaths, reduce deaths and flatten the curve has been it's been tremendously bad.
Yeah,
for
in
us
terms of
personally
in terms
and
of
for
people's
our
perception of the disease. Yeah.
for the economics, but it might actually be good for our mind going forward
Mm.
because less debt around us. Most people, if you think about yourself, you think about any person, most of us don't deal with debt. Okay, you're a doctor, so you probably deal with debt a
Yeah.
lot more than the rest of us. But
Yeah, a
most of
little
us,
bit more. Yeah.
like, separated, like a little bit of separation. We don't deal with debt much. Like in a year, death in close quarters, how many times do you go to a funeral? The older you get, maybe you go to a bit more. But
Yeah.
with a pandemic, you can deal with death all the time, every time. Like in New Jersey, some families, 6 people infected, 3 die.
Shit.
People
Yeah.
are dying like in their communities. The whole community is infected, and you get like 10 deaths in the community. That would be a lot to take in for a lot of people. A lot of people wouldn't be able to just
Yeah.
continue with do we and I wrote an article about do we just kind of continue with society? Do we ride it out? And the question is, if we do just pretend there's no pandemic and continue, will people participate in economic activity? Will they go to malls?
Yeah.
Will they go to restaurants? Will they go to shows? Will they behave like there's no piles of bodies everywhere? No, they won't behave like that.
Yeah. No, I do agree with you, and I think that the country has prepared itself for what may come. I mean,
Yeah.
from the healthcare side, I can say that we are preparing for the worst. So cancelled all elective operations here. We are emptying out our wards. We're making as much space available for a disaster, a real disaster, like having no ventilators, those types of things. But like your predictions, how bad do you think things will get?
Okay, so I keep being asked this question: when are we gonna peak? It's so difficult to say because we don't really have an idea from testing where we are. Because we've not tested that many people in relation to our population.
Yeah, we've tested very small. I think it's not even 1% yet.
Yeah, it's probably. I think it's less than 70,000 people, which is not a lot.
Yeah, I read the last I read was for 59,000 tests.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Maybe they did another 10,000 over the last few days. But this is the problem: is that without those tests and an idea of what the spread is, we can't really start saying, oh, how far away from the peak, how far is our lag? So the only thing we have to go with is deaths, because we know when deaths happen, that we count back 3 weeks, 4 weeks to infection. And then we kind of get an idea of, okay, so if people are dying, that means the disease has been around for at least 3 or 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks. And then we kind of calculate the new cases coming in, and we watch, is that going up? Because if that starts going down, then even though we're having lots of deaths, it means the new infections are going down. All that stuff we can't do much with because we don't have testing figures. So all we have is the deaths. And what the deaths are telling us, the deaths are telling me we don't have a serious problem.
I mean, look, I think that deaths make it give the perception to a lot of people that it isn't a serious problem. But I also, when I look at countries like us and India, India obviously has a far larger population and more dense, but essentially we're both third world countries and we both have very little deaths. India has very little deaths, very little cases. They now have implemented they've been under lockdown almost the same time as we have, but they don't have that many cases, they don't have many deaths, and you wonder whether a lot of people have looked at a lot of reasoning why this has occurred, and is so similar between us two countries. But like, I just don't think that we might be reporting the cases well enough. Maybe the efficacy of the tests are also poor. I've also watched some videos, even in here, just at Hillbrow Clinic, of untrained people doing the tests. They're not putting in the swabs all the way back to the, like, you got to really get to the
Quite
all the
deep,
way
huh?
back. So could we not be, maybe we're not testing well enough? Perhaps people in rural areas are uh, actually have COVID-19, might develop a pneumonia and die, and then they never get tested and they never diagnosed, and they just said to have a pneumonia, or a flu, or because is it practical for people at clinics to test every single person that comes in? I don't know if practically they're even doing that now.
No, they're not. But we are killing. We were giving people COVID-19 death status in
Yeah,
this
and even
country.
even the
We were
first two
making.
deaths, I found it very strange, almost
We were.
coincidental, that on the day of the first lockdown we had our two deaths. It was like almost like a political statement to the country to go, hey guys, this is serious now.
Two
This is
people have died. We
now
were.
people have died. Listen, hey, this thing is serious. Even though the second one, we're not really sure, but hey, it could be. So hey.
Yeah, and it's interesting because news reporters. I watched the news the whole day that day, and
Mm.
news reporters were out, people in queues and saying, "But guys, two people have died." So just playing it so well.
Yeah. It almost felt as if it was like planned. Like those people who were about to die or had died the day before, and then they dropped the news the same morning of the lockdown. Listen, people are dying now.
Mm.
Take this seriously, yeah.
I still think I'm not sure if we're not recording deaths. That's an interesting problem if we are doing that, because if we're not recording deaths, that means we have no way of ever getting a picture.
Look, I mean,
I think
I mean, now I guess people would be more strict with their death certificates, but I know, like, we had to fill out death certificates when patients die, and generally you put your best diagnosis if you don't have a diagnosis of why the person died,
would
and
you test someone posthumously, like after
no, there isn't any test. You can probably in the first 6 to 8 hours straight after death, you probably could
test
still.
a dead person?
Yeah, you could tell, like, a freshly dead person, you could probably test them. But yeah, so I guess it's possible, and I don't know how effective that test would be, but it is possible for a lot of things. If you do a post-mortem in the first like 6 to 8 hours, you can do a lot of blood tests, a lot of other things. You can make diagnosis posthumously. Yeah.
Okay, so I would think that would be a priority, right? Is that in this situation they would need to test people who died of pneumonia or flu-like
Yeah,
symptoms
yeah,
because of what we're facing. Look, I don't know what's going to happen over the next week. I know America is anticipating its worst week ever.
yeah.
I know the UK is now, I'm not sure what Boris state is in, but Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is in ICU.
Yeah, I heard that.
Isn't this guy like, isn't he like prime, based on the epidemiology, isn't he someone who might die from this? And then,
Yeah, he's like 55 years old, but like more so than that, just a few days before he announced that he's positive, he was trying to, because they've taken a very like lax approach. I don't know if you've been
they tried
seeing.
herd immunity first.
They're going for herd immunity. He went to the
But
hospital.
they
He was.
changed track.
Yeah, now they've changed their whole mindset. But in the beginning, they were all about herd immunity. And then he was in the hospital. He announced on live television, "No, guys, this isn't a problem. I've been in the hospital shaking people's hands. A few days later,
Yeah.
I'm tested positive for COVID-19. I'm sitting in my house, self quarantine." And then now his condition has deteriorated to the point where he's now in ICU.
Critical care.
Yeah, he's in ICU. I don't know if they've actually intubated him yet, but once you get intubated, it's really downhill from there. Like,
Yeah, I was watching the New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo, and he says once you are intubated, once you're on the ventilator,
yeah,
he
it's
says
late
the
for
longer
you.
you're on the ventilator, the less chance you have of getting off it.
Yeah. Like And even the complications just from being ventilated, you can the complications from being ventilated for a long period of time, because essentially what the ventilation does is it basically helps you breathe, because you're breathing the strain that your body is taking from trying to get oxygen into your lungs, it
Yeah.
causes you to tire yourself out, and your metabolic demand increases, your immune system weakens further, so that whole process is taken away by intubation. But the whole process, there's a tube literally in your windpipe,
Mm.
so you can get erosion from that tube. You can some people end up like, if you're intubated for a week, 2 weeks, it can actually erode through your entire trachea, through your esophagus. You can end up with a tracheostomy. You know those things that like heavy smokers get, where they have to press
Yeah.
here to talk, that type of thing. That's
Mm.
yeah, that thing, you can get that from long intubation. So it's terrible. But you know what I wanted to ask you? I wanted to ask you about herd immunity. Now, obviously, in European countries and the rest of the world, herd immunity is, uh, that's the idea they initially were following, or they anticipated that they could use that as a means to protect themselves. But now in South Africa, I think it's a completely different ball game. What do you think about, if we had to have used the herd immunity idea here in South Africa? What's your thoughts?
So for herd immunity to work, you have to have a good percentage of your population that has a chance of surviving the virus.
Yeah.
Because what you're basically saying to everyone who's healthy is go out there, you go get the disease,
Yeah.
you fight with the disease in your body. We will protect the elderly and the sick. They stay at home in this period. Once we've got enough people who have been to the virus, they can't infect other people in theory. They've developed antibodies that are immune. Then we, as a society, we've reached, I think it's 60 or 70%, between 60 and 70%, that everyone has to have had the virus for us to develop immunity. And then we go on with our society, right? Sweden is trying that. Sweden is the only country in the world who's kind of stuck to this idea of let's do herd immunity.
And how are they doing?
Well, they've sacrificed their old people because their elderly are dying in care homes. And they realize it now. They've also manipulated their figures as far as I can tell. So they've got a weird way of registering deaths. They register deaths with COVID-19 and deaths from COVID-19. So from COVID-19, if you die from COVID-19, there's no other explanation. Deaths with COVID-19, like a little bit of a gray area. Oh, the person was quite sick and COVID-19 exacerbated their situation.
Oh, okay.
But they died from whatever they had.
Oh, like something else, but they also had COVID-19. Like they had a kidney problem. Okay. I see.
Whereas most countries, if you were sick and you had COVID-19 and you died, that's together considered a death from COVID-19. Whereas they are saying, no, there's separation. If you got COVID-19 and then made your condition worse, then you still died from that condition, kind of thing. So that's registered as a death from whatever, diabetes or whatever.
Yeah, and
so,
no, carry on.
For us to get herd immunity, look, eventually herd immunity is probably the only way we defeat the virus if we don't get a vaccine. So let's say there's no vaccine. There's never a vaccine. Well, this is the only other option. We can't hide like this forever. We can't stay like in these cycles, these lockdown cycles, because we come out of this lockdown and there's another spike. What do we do? Go back in lockdown, in and out of lockdowns the whole time to kind of just hide from the virus and let it go? No, we can't do that. We have to either vaccinate or find herd immunity. And the problem is Africa with herd immunity is that we cannot send our young people out to contract the virus, our younger population, because a lot of our younger population has conditions and comorbidities, chronic illnesses, diabetes, hypertension, and then we have
and just to interject there for the people watching, when Carvin's talking about young people, he's not talking about like 18-year-olds and he's talking about like up until like people in their 50s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we're
those
not
are
talking
people.
about young as in like children and stuff. We're not sending our our lighties
No.
out there to catch it. We're talking about like 30 to 50-year-old people who've got,
Yeah.
and also we have the highest, I think probably, yeah, definitely the highest rate of HIV in the world here in South Africa in
Yes.
terms of a
So
population. So herd immunity, like my opinion is that herd immunity won't work. We'll just if we release the lockdown or we're not careful with how we open up our borders, how we slowly remove restrictions, I can see a lot of the young people in our country dying from HIV,
yes.
and the because they're immunocompromised, they actually shed the virus for much longer. So, like my anticipation is that the lockdown is going to continue for that reason because the cases, if we have cases that were popping up a month ago and infecting those immunocompromised people, those immunocompromised people are going to remain infectious for much, much longer than an average
Sure.
person would. So that's why, in my opinion, maybe the government's taking that into consideration and going, okay, because of that, and because we're seeing a spike in the number of cases in immunocompromised patients, that's going to cause more infections within communities. And obviously, HIV does thrive in lower socioeconomic groups, which are densely populated. So it's going to spread much quicker there and then spread and stay there for much longer than it would normally in like it wouldn't in other countries where they have less immunocompromised people, if you get what I'm saying.
Mm. Look, you're right. I'm not sure. The problem with the first group of people that were tested, the 49,000, around 49,000 people out of Wuhan,
Yeah.
that gave us the general profile of the virus, epidemiology, what to look out for. This whole idea that it affects older people. 80% of people will have mild symptoms, mild to moderate. All those dynamics come from a sample group out of China,
Which is a completely different population.
They were completely different genetic makeup to us. They also, their lifestyle, and most importantly, that group had nobody with HIV/AIDS, so there was no way of them telling early on what does the virus do in the body where there's another virus that's already in charge. How do the two like interact with each other?
I mean, they have done studies though on SARS. So they did it on SARS, which is very closely related, but obviously you can't say for sure. But based on the studies that I've read on SARS with immunocompromised patients, so they started first testing on ferrets, I know those little like rats, and then they also did like on some other mammal, I can't remember. Anyway, on these studies, it showed that in the ferrets and in humans who are immunocompromised that had SARS and H1N1, these patients remained, they still were detectable. You could still find the virus on them for an average of 21 to 28 days after.
Which is much longer, right?
Yeah, which is much longer than what we are seeing now. The whatever studies are coming out of China and Europe, they're estimating at most 19 days. At most, even in the elderly and whoever has managed to make a recovery, 19 days is sort of like the average. Whereas here you're looking at 21 to 28. So that's why I think it's going to be a very tricky job for the government to decide and weigh it up. How long can we keep this lockdown for? Can we provide food and basic necessities for the poorest in our country before they start becoming desperate? And then that's going to be another issue, because on my other podcast episode, I actually was reminiscing about my studies. And during my studies in pediatrics, they would always teach us that it's far more risky to tell a HIV positive mother to go and try and get formula for her child and let her prepare the formula and give it to her child, rather than just telling her to breastfeed her child and treat her with ARVs and treat the child and hope that the child won't get infected. Because more children die from malnutrition and starvation than they do from HIV. We can treat HIV, we can't treat malnutrition. So instead of the mother going out and trying to fetch, get milk and formula and things, rather just tell them to breastfeed and with the risk of infecting them. That's how serious our poverty issue is here in South Africa.
Yeah. Interesting. 1 minute, 1 minute. So, just to kind of follow what you're saying, so I've been reading, you probably recognize this book, right?
Oh, I can't see. Just tell me what the book is.
You recognize it, right?
No, I can't see. Do you want me to get up?
Okay, Pediatrics and Child Healthcare, the Oxford, it's the 5th edition. You
Yes.
I've been reading it for the last week or so. Because, just to feed into what you're saying, I've been trying to understand, and it's written for a third world, from a South African perspective, actually.
Yes.
Right? I'm trying to understand how long does this lockdown last before it begins to do what this book is like and what you were talking about, where we have serious malnutrition and eventually starvation. And it looks like because our economy, the informal economy is day to day, we are a lot closer to that than we realize. Europe, the social structures, I know in south of Italy, people are already looting. Well, not in the same way we understand looting, but they are running out of the shop without paying.
Oh, wow.
Because they actually just don't have the money. The south of Italy is not wealthy like the north of Italy where this all kind of started. So they're like, we are poor. And the big concern there is that the only people that can help now is organized crime, right? Organized crime. And organized crime always has a philanthropic sort of like tinge to it, where they look after you and they make sure that you got food and whatever the case is. And exchange a bit of control over the people. And they're not sure the government can do what the organized crime community can do for the people, which is a strange, like, just bizarre idea. The criminals would be more beneficial to the public than the government.
So, in what way are organized criminals assisting? How I didn't follow.
So, in an organized crime society, they would provide food regularly because they'd have access to lots of money. That's part of their control, right? And even in communities like in like where I'm from, it's not uncommon for the local drug dealer to be the person that has a little party with the people, supplies food.
Yeah. Now we all know we all, because I mean I grew up in Sydenham, so I know there was.
So you know it.
There's a guy. I mean I'm not gonna say who it is, but But there is the so okay now I get your point now. I get your point.
So there's this real concern. In Italy, there's a real concern that this might happen. Because people are now at the point where they don't have food. And they're giving out food packets there. And you think of Italy, we think of Europe in a different way to what Europe really is. Because it's like any society, it has rich and poor. And societies like Italy more so have disparities between rich and poor than, for example, a Scandinavian country like Sweden or Norway, where there's a lot more socialist policies. But even the poorest Scandinavian is still probably richer than a middle-class South African.
Of course,
Whereas in Italy, their poverty is real. It's bread and butter. And in South Africa, I don't know if we are testing the people by telling them to be on lockdown with no money. I don't know how we expect this to end. Because if you're hungry, you're hungry. Crime exists in a lot of parts of the world for food. Someone's Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy Johnson.
it's
Bumpy Johnson. So this experiment that we are running here is so dangerous. It's so dangerous.
It really is, and I think after this lockdown, the government and leadership really has to look very closely at whatever data they have, whatever economic information they can get, and make a very sound judgment. Because what they decide at the end of the 16th is the 16th of April. Yeah, I think it's 16th.
Sixteenth, yeah.
When we on that day, whatever the president tells us, I hope that he has a very strong plan as to what is going to happen after. Because if we just open our borders, if we just allow domestic travel again, we're going to see quite a big spike in our infection rates after that. But hey, these are just our opinions. We only time will tell, I
Well,
guess.
I think the government's going to be forced. So if you look at, and I'm sure there's people watching here, from the 13 people that are watching,
Yeah.
if you look at the income level that you were at
Yeah.
before this and
Yeah.
where you are today,
Yeah.
you can feel you've lost spending power. Now, what that means is you're not engaging in the economy. And then what that means is the government can't make money off VAT tax. So eventually, the government's going to be forced economically to send people back to work. How long can the government survive with no income?
Yeah, and those guys need money. We know how much they like it.
People like yourself, right, who work for the state.
Yeah.
Eventually, people like yourself will be told, listen, we can't pay you this and that.
Oh, we've been told that many times. Don't worry, I'm used to that now.
And there's nothing. The professionals don't in what you were saying don't realize, because the borders are closed. You can't say, well, I'm leaving and going to Australia. They don't want you there.
Yeah, they don't want. You can't go anywhere. You're stuck. I don't know if
And then they say,
Lesotho.
this is not paying you. What you gonna do?
I don't know, man.
Companies,
Unless Lesotho or Swaziland is open, that's the only other option.
I don't think any of those countries. We don't know much about what's happening in our neighbors, Lesotho and Swaziland. But I'm a bit worried that there's nothing happening. Like there's no awareness. And I keep looking at the stats, trying to get an idea of what's the spread in our neighboring countries. And I don't know. It just feels
I haven't found anything. Either they're just very quiet about it, or just nothing is going on. I don't know.
Countries with lower number of cases, 10 cases and 3 deaths, that doesn't add up.
Very strange.
Doesn't add up because the virus has been around for a while. You can't have such a small number of cases.
It's impossible. It's impossible. The virus spreads too quickly. But
You
yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
Anyway.
But it's been quite a long podcast now. So let's just wrap up with the final question I wanted to ask you. What effect do you think this lockdown and the pandemic as a whole for our country here and for the world in terms of our entertainment or our live entertainment industry? What do you think is going to effects do you think is going to happen, and how do you feel as a comedian or a live performer? What are your thoughts on the pandemic and how it's affected just live performance? Or
Okay, so I think private events will go ahead. I think weddings, birthday
Yeah.
parties, conferences. And I think that part of the live performance economy will continue. I think the stage, club comedy, big theaters, that one we'll have to see how it plays out, because I think in that area there's going to be a bit of psychology at play for people to actually spend money, because it's not just do I go into a space where I might get sick, but also do I really need to spend this money on this?
Exactly, yeah.
Kind of just get what they
That's
ideas and thoughts are.
yeah. No,
Because we can't have an economy like we had before. Our gig economy can never be the same, because there's just not going to be that much more liquidity in the market.
Well, I mean, even countries like America and UK, who have a far more middle class population, so a lot more higher attendance at their live shows. A lot of comedians don't struggle to sell out there. They have big comedy clubs, 400, 500 people. They can fill out easily on a Tuesday night, Wednesday night. Whereas us as South Africa, we don't have as big a middle class. So our priorities in terms of spending, and even in our middle class, a lot of people aren't in the upper middle class, they're sort of in the lower. And after you paid for medical aid and this and that, to then say, I'm going to spend another 500 Rand for me and my wife to go out and see a comedian.
Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make it already didn't make sense. What I'm saying is it already didn't make sense for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Now more so, it's going to be a even bigger decision for them to go. I mean, a tougher decision for them to go. Okay, all 5 of us in the family, let's pay 200 Rand a pop for 1,000 Rand. I'm going to go see Carvin. It's a tough decision. I'm not saying it's not worth it, but
No, yeah.
but and my thinking is also it might be necessary for us as a country, and it's a perfect way for us to heal through humor. But is it practical?
Look, after the Great Recession, the Americans, the people who lost the most work was artists. People who, like, they all didn't have jobs. So anyway, this is an interesting thing. So about it should be about a month ago now, I put out a video telling people like us start thinking of other careers because.
And what was the response?
Well, yeah, a lot of people. Okay, so it's not just people like us. It's anyone who works in gig economy.
Yeah.
You work in an economy day by day where you're looking for the next gig. So even if you're like, even people who cut hair, people who do sound, put up stages, video, any freelance sort of work that requires interaction with people, and then of course the broader tourism industry, like the industry that's really like done is tourism. Like I got friends who have tourism businesses who can't see a way back at this point. And the problem with that is that, like, for what we do, our skill set investments is in our experience and our time. Their investments is in property and is in staff and equipment and beds, and so their real-time losses are more in focus than ours, because ours we still have our skills, we don't lose. They will now lose assets, and those assets.
Yeah, man.
That's where all the was.
Yeah, it's looking. It's going to be an interesting time coming out of this lockdown. I'm looking forward to see it.
I don't want to leave people thinking it's all done and dusted. The thing is to kind of look for pandemic-proof occupations. If you're working in an occupation now that is dependent on us interacting with each other, is to start looking around, because I think if you don't start looking now and you wait for this to ride out, and it will eventually, the cloud will lift. This will not be the end of us. This will change. It will turn around. But the amount of time that takes to turn around, I'm not sure if you listening has enough of a retainer and you've saved enough to ride you, to take you through this period. Because those who do have enough might just ride it out and just see how it kind of finishes off. But for everyone else, I think you should start getting onto your bike and looking. Start applying for jobs. Go on and think, right? I don't know. Selling hand sanitizers seems to be a quick money maker 2-3 weeks ago. I'm not sure if it's still a popular thing to do. No one seems to be asking for hand sanitizer like they were 3 weeks ago. So you have to look for
sell Carvin Goldstone's hand sanitizer.
No.
Sell toilet paper with your face on it. I think that's a good.
No.
You don't think people would buy that?
No. I think the occupation that you choose, or the occupation anyone chooses, you have to now really think, if another pandemic happens, because this is a whole mess up here, that if anyone looks at the history of the Spanish flu, right?
Yeah.
The Spanish flu came in waves. So it came with the first wave, the second wave, the third wave. And South Africa seems to have caught in the first wave. So during the Spanish flu 1918, we lost 300,000 people in this country to the Spanish flu. In total, it killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. So in contrast, this is not doing anything near Spanish flu numbers. But that's because of the severe mitigation that we all engaged in around the world. And I think if we get waves of this, the occupation that you're in, that you're kind of riding out, if we get another wave, can you ride out again? Probably not.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think start moving around, maybe this is not going to work. Let's try this.
No, very, very wise words from you, Carvin. Thank you.
I'm not a fan, sorry, man, so
Yeah.
I'm not a fan necessarily of stand-up on screen like this.
Yeah, no, it's terrible idea. Terrible
I
idea.
feel like that's trying to not evolve. Like, because you almost like forcing this to still work.
Yeah.
And really, the beauty and danger of stand-up is in the person feeling the tension of you being in front and looking around the room. And is he gonna pick on me? Is he gonna tell something? And then the laughter, it's infectious and like reverberates around the space is what makes it a beautiful art form and makes it so unique. And that's why people come back. So I think the idea of doing it on a screen with no audience, I don't think that's...
It's just impossible unless I don't know how. And I think hopefully that people will come up with some sort of creative way of sort of maybe making stand-up available on a live streaming platform. But to me, it just seems near impossible to capture the essence of what stand-up comedy is for the performer and for the audience in a live room sitting together. And that's why it's going to be tricky for a lot of us going back,
So I do videos, and I've asked a few comics who've done it, who've done paid live shows, what it's like. And they were like, it's all weird, but people enjoy it because people are in lockdown. And so we almost have to find a way to do it. And I think there might be a middle ground between almost podcasting and performing. Somewhere in the middle there might be this new art form of storytelling and performing without really performing. And a conversation, but with consciousness that the audience is in front of you, unlike a podcast where you almost talking to someone and pretending there's no one there listening.
But also, what stand-up comedy is about feedback. You get feedback from the audience. If the audience is laughing, then unless you have like a sort of, with Zoom, you can have many people in a meeting. So unless every person, and then you can hear them respond. But I don't know how that's gonna work, and it's just not. It's not natural to just watch somebody on a screen and then have that same reaction as you would if you're watching them.
16 seconds there as well.
Huh?
13 seconds remaining. You can say goodbye.
All right. Thank you for joining me today, Carvin. That's another episode of the Daily Dose. Hope you guys enjoy. Peace, love. Assalamu alaikum. Take care. Bye, Carvin.